And I wonder if the dream center can be created through dialogue, because it can't be created through A plus B equals C, or step 1, step 2, step 3. I think dialogue is what can transform the nature of consciousness so that it becomes dialogical instead of ego-logical. I feel it's important to remain in dialogue, because if one goes into a manic monologue and goes too high in one's perceptions away from the way others perceive reality energetically, then energetically one has to come back down, which is the so-called psychosis process. And that's again what I talk about when I say there's no personal enlightenment or personal growth or goal if we don't dialogue our way there together. There's no value whatsoever. There might be personal flow by becoming some kind of extreme sports athlete, but flow in terms of personal gain in society, in daily life, that there's no such thing. When one is flowing in sport, there's no personal gain there per se. It's probably more of an act of beauty. But if somebody's trying to do something flowy to get personal gain in reality, there's no beauty there. And when one is flowing like that with sport, one has to be in perfect alignment with one's neurology and biology. And if we're trying to flow in society in a way that is for some but not for others, that's actually against our neurology and biology. So after holistic perception and one comes back through psychosis, one is again abstracting and dividing reality with thoughts instead of speaking of holistic perceptions and using sounds as an instrument of that perception. We're instruments of our perceptions, but when we're not clear, we're instruments of our thought deceptions. I wonder if anyone will see something in what I've been talking about with myself in terms of something one might want to roll with, or a role somebody might want to play. I feel there's this self-deception in mental illness, but not the one that we would likely think of when hearing that, and that is that the other is deceived that they are normal and that the person they're looking at is mentally ill. And they're creating this division and thinking of this label, which is dividing our humanity. So people who go through map consciousness and trance consciousness are often at times perceiving very accurately. And then they get this inaccurate label and this inaccurate perception overlaid over their humanity. And so so-called normal people are deceiving themselves by doing that. And treating it as a problem increases the disorder and confusion. It could actually be a solution seen from a different angle and perspective and vantage point. And Dr. David Bohm talked about observing as gathering with the eye and listening as gathering with the ear, and how the observer is what it gathers. What do you gather from this? Are we gathering hate? Are we gathering love? Are we gathering learning? Are we gathering together? Can we gather our brains together and dialogue? So I feel like mania is the brain gathering. It's harvesting reality, it's harvesting its perceptions. And then we don't necessarily get a chance to unfold that. And that's why it's important to go back and harvest one's mania, because mania is actually a process of harvesting life and harvesting learning and harvesting one's vision. One actually has access to vision, and one is gathering as one moves through reality. And then we get cut off from that through intervention and medication. and the way we're received, but we can still go back and ungather what we gathered, unfold what we gathered, and harvest. So mania is the brain gathering something else in a different way. It's gathering perceptions. It's a different mode of gathering information. It's informing us, and then we can outform with that information. It's like we're gathering the collective and we can gesture it in. So if we're perceiving and it's changing our gestures in that moment, we're actually changing something moment to moment by a change in gesture, and that's the universe animating us. And that's why I feel it's important to remember those gestures and practice them or be aware of them in daily life, because the universe gave us the blueprint. So even if we haven't fully harvested, we can begin right away to gesture in the vision through our daily actions and gestures. And Dr. David Bohm said, according to what you assume, you will collect and gather certain information as important and put it together in a certain way. And I feel like if you don't assume anything, you assume the role of the universe. You assume the role the universe appoints to you in the moment, and we become the moment. I feel like there could be a character in a show called The Moment instead of The Situation. Really, I feel like we're disguised as mental patients. It's our disguise. And diagnosis is disheartening. And that's really what does the damage. I feel like when we look without the observer, without the ego self sound, the universe sees through us and it can see what's going on. And the universe is not impressed by the impressions it receives through us. And perception is quantum, and it uses a different part of the brain. It's a different computation besides association and thought. And we use drugs because we're not making our own internal drugs in our brain, and these brain drugs are turned on when we're seeing in a quantum way. If there's no one who is looking, no self, then the one is looking. And mania is when the one acts and when the one animates us. And it does so to look for the one and create the one and unfold the one. And I wonder, why do we have sound blocking listening and images blocking seeing? These are all holograms blocking the clear perception of the world, which is supposed to imprint a hologram representation of the actual that is there. And that's what speaks to us when we're in touch with what is actually there. We speak as we are touched, and those images and thoughts block us from being touched. We can't be touched by interpretation. Interpretation blocks being touched. And when we're touched, it renders us silent. And that which blocks us from being touched is not silence, it's noise. Our brains are holographic processors, and we can read holographically if we don't have these holographic interruptions. We can read the whole pattern of reality holographically. It seems like these words and images in our brain are holographic and holophonic scars. They scar our holographic processors. They're holographic and holophonic scars in the brain. And that field of thought and images, that field of noise, is common to us all. Most of those thoughts and images we got from other people. So it's theirs too, and it's not just ours. So we're not these separate individuals with these separate egos, even as we think we are. And I think this collective holographic and holophonic noise is the weight that we carry. It's our material, structure. It's all shared. We've gotten it all from somewhere else and somebody else. And this weight, this interruption in our holographic processing, is an interference pattern that is interfering with the pattern of actuality that's right there for us to see. And that's why this doesn't take time. It's a matter of the interference being there or not being there. It's not a matter of getting rid of little bits of this interference. There's so many bits of it. You can never get rid of it. If you get rid of it bit by bit, it would take 10,000 lifetimes. It's just seeing that we're being interfered with by this holographic and holophonic noise in our brain and nervous system. And this noise, when we record it, these interference patterns are recorded in our brain. So the interference patterns are this two-dimensional energy wave pattern. And that's actually that interference pattern as energy and waves is actually what creates and holds our brain cell structures together. And so that's like the scarring. That's what creates these wires. But when all of that noise is gone, the brain is just fluid and it can create itself as the mind sees in the moment, fluidly. Language is a virus of interference pattern. Anything we believe, anything we absorb, interferes with the brain's pliability. Its ability to be pliable and to be reliable in the perceptions. So these interference patterns are actually language viruses that reverberate in our brain and keep our brain cells captive to that, to seeing through that, to using that interference pattern, those words and those collective interference patterns to actually throw out a net into the infinity of reality and capture just a tiny little portion of distortion. And I wonder if it interferes with us and steers us to a point where we realize we don't need it. So it seems that maybe the ego is the collective accumulated interference patterns of holographic images and holophonic sounds that drown out the complexity of the moment. And we wonder why our lives don't feel meaningful, because this holographic noise pattern that we use to extract reality is kept intact, and that's not what we're meant to see forever. So it doesn't feel meaningful. I almost feel like this adjacent light body in a way could be the holographic noise. It's in the way of the true physical senses. It seems like it blocks and it distorts the clear holographic extrapolation, quantum computation. And when you can see clearly, you don't need this holographic block, this holoblock. So the ego could just be a holoblock. It's like this block, this thing, blocking perception. And the self blocks seeing, which is necessary to continue to not act. We don't really want to see. So then we have to change. We'd have to act contrary to the program's social morality of success and personal gain and goals and all of that stuff. It's the awakening of intelligence. Intelligence is seeing moment to moment, not projecting past stuff onto the moment, which reduces the grandness of the moment to something so small. How can that be intelligence?